This gum, Mr. Wonka went on, is my latest, my greatest, my most fascinating invention. It's a chewing gum meal. It's, it's, it's that tiny little strip of gum lying there is a whole 3-course dinner all by itself. What sort of nonsense is this? Said one of the fathers. My dear sir, cried Mr. Wonka, when I start selling this gum in the shops, it will change everything. It will be the end of all kitchens and all cooking. There will be no more shopping to do, no more buying of meat and groceries. There will be no knives, no forks at meal times, no plates, no washing up, no rubbish, no mess. Just a tiny little strip of Wonka's magic chewing gum. And that's all you'll ever need at breakfast, lunch and supper. This piece of gum I've just made happens to be tomato soup, roast beef and blueberry pie. But you can have almost anything you want. What do you mean it's tomato soup, roast beef and blueberry pie? Said Violet Beauregard. If you were to start chewing it, said Mr. Wonka, then that is exactly what you would get on the menu. It's absolutely amazing. You can actually feel the food going down your throat and into your tummy, and then you can taste it perfectly. It fills you up, it satisfies you, it's terrific. It's utterly impossible, said Veruca Salt. Just so long as it's gum, shouted Violet Beauregard. Just so long as it's a piece of chewing gum and I can chew it, then that's for me. And quickly she took her own world record piece of gum out of her mouth and stuck it behind her left ear. Come on, Mr. Wonka. Hand it over, this magic gum of yours, and we'll see if the thing works. Now, Violet, said Mrs. Beauregard, her mother, let's don't do anything silly, Violet. I want that gum, Violet said obstinately. What's so silly? I'd rather you didn't take it, Mr. Wonka told her gently. You see, I haven't got things quite right yet. There's still 1 or 2... Oh, to blazes with that, said Violet. And suddenly, before Mr. Wonka could stop her, she shot out a fat hand and grabbed the stick of gum out of the little drawer and popped it into her mouth. Her huge, well-trained jaws started chewing away on it like a pair of big tongs. Don't, said Mr. Wonka. Fabulous, cried Violet. It's tomato soup. It's hot and creamy and delicious. I can feel it running down my throat. Stop, said Mr. Wonka. The gum isn't ready yet. It's not right. Of course it's right, said Violet. It's working beautifully. Oh my, what beautiful soup this is. Spit it out, dear, said Mr. Wonka. It's changing, shouted Violet, chewing and grinning both at the same time. The second course is coming up. It's roast beef. It's tender and juicy, and oh boy, what a flavour. The baked potato is marvellous too. It's got a crispy skin and it's all filled with butter inside. But how interesting, Violet, said Mrs. Beauregard. You are a clever girl. Keep chewing, baby, said Mr. Beauregard. Keep right on chewing. This is a great day for the Beauregards. Our little girl, the first person in the world to have a chewing gum meal. Everybody was watching Violet Beauregard as she stood there chewing this extraordinary gum. Little Charlie Bucket was staring at her, absolutely spellbound, watching her huge rubbery lips as they pressed and unpressed with the chewing, and Grandpa Joe stood beside him, gasping at the girl. Mr. Wonka was wringing his hands and saying, No, 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 no. It isn't ready for eating. It isn't right. You mustn't do it. Blueberry pie and cream, shouted Violet. Here it comes. Oh my, it's perfect. It's beautiful. It's exactly as though I'm swallowing it. It's as though I'm chewing and swallowing great big spoonfuls of the most marvellous blueberry pie in the world. Good heavens, shouted Mrs. Beauregard suddenly, staring at Violet. What's happening to your nose? Oh, be quiet, Mother, and let me finish, said Violet. It's turning blue, screamed Mrs. Beauregard. Your nose is turning as blue as a blueberry. Your mother is right, shouted Mr. Beauregard. Your whole nose has gone purple. What do you mean? Said Violet, still chewing away. Your cheeks, screamed Mrs. Beauregard. They're turning blue as well. So is your chin. Your whole face is turning blue. Spit that gum out at once, ordered Mr. Beauregard. Mercy save us all, yelled Mrs. Beauregard. The girl's going blue and purple all over. Even her hair is changing colour. Violet, you're turning violet. Violet, what is happening to you? I told you I hadn't got it quite right, sighed Mr. Wonka, shaking his head sadly. I'll say you haven't, cried Mrs. Beauregard. Just look at the girl now. Everybody was staring at Violet, and what a terrible, peculiar sight she was. Her face and hands and legs and neck, in fact the skin all over her body as well as her great mop of curly hair, had turned a brilliant purplish blue, the colour of blueberry juice. It always goes wrong when we come to the pie, sighed Mr. Wonka. It's the blueberry that does it, but I'll get it right one day. You wait and see. Violet, screamed Mrs. Beauregard, you're swelling up. I feel sick, Violet said. You're swelling up, screamed Mrs. Beauregard again. I feel very peculiar, said Violet. I'm not surprised, said Mr. Beauregard. Good heavens, girl, he screeched. You're blowing up like a balloon. Like a blueberry, actually, said Mr. Wonka. Call a doctor, shouted Mrs. Beauregard. Prick her with a pin, said one of the other fathers. Save her, cried Mrs. Beauregard, wringing her hands. There you go, look. She's blowing up like a great big blueberry. But there was no saving her now. Her body was swelling up and changing shape at such a rate that within a minute it had turned into nothing less than an enormous round blue ball. A gigantic blueberry, in fact, and all that remained was Violet, was a tiny pair of legs, a tiny pair of arms, and a little head on top, sticking out of the giant blueberry fruit. It always happens like that, sighed Mr. Wonka. I've tried it nearly 20 times in the testing room on Oompa Loompas. Every one of them finished up as a blueberry. It was most annoying. I just can't understand it. But I don't want a blueberry for a daughter, yelled Mrs. Beauregard. Put her back to what she was this instant. Mr. Wonka clicked his fingers and 10 Oompa Loompas appeared immediately at his side. Roll Miss Beauregard into the boat, he said to them, and take her to the juicing room at once. The juicing room? Cried Mrs. Beauregard. What are they going to do there? Squeeze her, said Mr. Wonka. They've got to squeeze the juice out of her immediately. After that, we'll just have to see how she comes out. But don't worry, my dear Mrs. Beauregard. We'll get her repaired if it's the last thing we do. I'm sorry about it all, I really am. Already the 2 Oompa Loompas were rolling the enormous blueberry across the floor of the inventing room towards the door that led to the chocolate river, where the boat was waiting. Mr. and Mrs. Beauregard hurried after them. The rest of the party, including little Charlie, Bucket and Grandpa Joe, stood absolutely still and watched them go. Listen, whispered Charlie. Grandpa, the Oompa Loompas in the boat outside are starting to sing. The voices, 100 of them, singing together, came loud and clear into the room. This is a very long song, and I'm not sure of the tune. So, again, like the song with the previous child, if you'd like to Google it, Google Violet Beauregard Blueberry song, and it will come up. Look, there's more than 2 pages of song. And there's Violet being rolled along to the juicing machine. Right, read you the rest tomorrow.